Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Passengers, which is the recent 2016 film. Just came out. It starred Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt. It also starred Lawrence Fishburne. He was in there for a very short amount of time. This review has spoilers all over it, so I'm just going to proceed from there. Just be aware. Okay, so this movie, first of all, 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love this movie. I mean, it was fantastic. I really, really like this movie. And the reason why is it is, I think we as Americans have a lot of complaints about films today, especially big blockbusters. And I felt that this was a blockbuster film. Now, you might want to say it's not a big blockbuster, but it definitely qualifies to me on the low end of blockbuster. It had a budget of $110 million. The numbers on this movie are fascinating. Let me talk about the film, and then we'll talk about the numbers a little bit. So this movie, so basically, here's the story. The story is that Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt are specifically passengers on this huge colony ship. The ship is going from Earth to a new planet, right? Now, Chris Pratt plays a character named Jim the mechanic, all right? And he is a mechanic. and so basically, Jim is on this colony ship. The colony ship route from Earth to the new planet is 120 years long, right? So that's how long they're going to be on this ship. So, basically you have a situation where, the journey is actually somewhat is longer than the lifespan of the people on the ship. Okay. All right. Except that all the passengers and the crew are in suspended animation. All right. So they are in a deep sleep mode and they are preserved. Okay. All right, so at that point, basically they would travel for 120 years, and when they wake up, they'll be in the same, they'll essentially be in the same position they are now as far as health and life and all of that, right? So we get to see the colony ship as it's passing through space. It hits meteorites, right? Now, basically the science behind this, I felt like they did what they could to make the science as strong as possible. The first thing you could tell, any hard science fiction movie, it's going to have a rotating spaceship. That is a number one rule for hard versus soft science fiction, right? So they have this ship, and it has, kind of a central fuselage, and then all the parts of the ship rotate around that central fuselage. The whole point of that is to create gravity, so forth, right? So this film is being built on top of the same structure as Space 2001, the great Kubrick film, some of Isaac Asimov's work, that kind of thing, right? So basically, it does have, it's trying to come from a hard science perspective. So the ship itself is traveling through space, and we're meant to believe that it's doing everything it can to avoid large asteroids, right? Just through good navigation and things like that. And then also the ship, Jim the mechanic says this later in the ship, but the ship has huge amounts of redundant systems. The entire ship is really nothing but the initial systems and redundant systems in spades. So it's all redundant systems. And it's all automated and all has an incredibly efficient artificial intelligence that is running the ship, right? So, with that said, you have this situation where the ship actually comes across a large asteroid field, and the ship does everything it can to deal with this, right? So, and one of those is it has this very, very powerful shield up front that is used to break through whatever, smaller and even larger rocks that it comes across, right? Well, one of these rocks, isn't broken down completely, punches through the shield and punches through the ship, right? The ship then seals up everything it can, but there's some residual parts that are still broken, okay? This triggers minor problems in the ship, right? And one of those problems is the waking of one of the people in the pod. So Jim the mechanic is woken from his sleeping pod with 90 years left to go, okay? Now, he's the only person on the ship. Now, the ship is completely automated, right? And it's already set up to take care of people who are in it, right? So what he gets to do is he drinks coffee, he gets food, he actually has liquor. There is this one character, I think his name was Charlie, he's the bartender, right? But he's a robot, right? So he does talk with the robot, but he spends all this time alone. And the first thing he does is you kind of go through these steps of, these are all the things he has to do, right? So one, he investigates to see if he can wake up the crew. He can't wake up the crew. And then at that point, he sees if he can, oh, that's right. Now he spends a whole lot of time seeing if he can put himself back to sleep, right? Can't do that. And then he, then he tries to message back home, right? He can't do that. The message would take 18 years to get home and like another 33 years to get back to them, right? So that's like 50 years for a round trip, and so that's not going to work either, right? So he does his due diligence, do everything he can. And at that point, he realizes, hey, I'm alone. I'm just going to have to live by myself, right? So he does that. He does that for a full year, right? And he just enjoys everything he can on the ship. And he tries to do everything he can. But being alone, he gets horribly depressed and it gets to the point where he really, there's an airlock that allows you to go for a spacewalk, right? And he figures out that he can actually trigger the airlock while he's outside of his suit, right? And so this would be a very quick way to kill himself. And so he really does. He considers killing himself. And he literally has his hand on the switch and he says, I can't do this. He doesn't kill himself. Right, and so then he runs out because he's frightened by the choice he just made or didn't make, and he runs out of the room and he comes across. Now this was one of the parts that was interesting about the film. This film was fantastic. It was fantastically written, fantastically acted, just phenomenal. So one of the things is he comes across Jennifer Lawrence, right, in her pod, right. So once he sees her, he's really struck by her, right? And honestly, I think, it's kind of love at first sight situation. He falls in love with her. And then he researches her. And he pulls up all the ship's logs and he learns all about her. And he just listens to all these videos about her and all these kind of things, right? Well, she's a writer. Her name is Aurora, and she's Aurora the writer, right? So that's her. So at this point, he really considers, hey, what am I going to do? I don't want to pull this lady out of suspended animation, right? And but he also realizes that if he doesn't pull this lady out of suspended animation, he's going to be alone forever, right? And he just can't live with that. Like he already knows that living alone, he will want to kill himself, or he'll drink himself to death, or something. Like he just can't deal with being alone, right? So he really spends a long time really just pontificating and really hand-wringing, and then he decides to wake up Aurora. So he does the research and he figures out how to wake her up from her pod safely, right? And he does. He wakes Aurora up. Okay? Then he lies to Aurora and lets her run around the ship doing all the same things he did. Trying to get into the crew's quarters, trying to wake up the crew, trying to send a message back to home, and he tells her, there's some mistake, both our pods woke and we're both awake now, and he did not let her know, I woke you up, right? And and he lets her go through this like 2-3 week transition where she's just trying everything she can to get herself out of this situation. Now, this was smart of him. You can't, I think it's one of the most terrible things in life. You can't make people learn from your mistakes. It's just something you can't do, right? And so it was really, it was sad. It was very, very sad. And so at that point, Aurora is now kicks into, hey, I'm stuck here mode, right? And then starts to say, well, what am I going to do with this time, right? Well, her idea was to write about going to this other world, right? And so she starts writing, which is good. And then at that point, the movie kicks into kind of date mode, right? And Jim, the mechanic, asks Aurora on a date, and then they have a date, and then they're together, and they start to build a life together. And Aurora starts to begin to fall in love with Jim, and Jim is already smitten with Aurora. And so they spend about, I think, maybe another 3 to 6 months together, right? And during this time, the ship is showing small signs that it is seriously in trouble, and that not that it's seriously in trouble, that it's in trouble, and that the problems it has are growing worse, right? So Aurora, so that we reach the point where Jim is about to propose to Aurora, right? Now, the robot bartender, they each have a day with him, right? Now, there's certain days where they can just they can go together and talk with him, but like they each have a day where they can just talk to the robot, right? And so now Jim had talked to the robot for a long time, and so the robot knows that Jim woke Aurora up, right? Now Jim said to the robot, "Do not tell Aurora that I woke her up." Well, when Jim decides to ask her to marry him, it's clear to the robot that this is happening, and he decides at that point to tell Aurora. Then we go into a very dark period of the film, and what happens is it's a really interesting film. So at that point, basically she understands that he woke her up. She is horrified, right? She's like, you murdered me. You took my entire life, right? And so she is horrendously angry, right? And there's actually a scene where she comes in and she just beats the living crap out of him in his bed, like wakes him up sleeping and just like wails on him, kicks him, punches him, the whole thing, and then picks up from close to his bed, picks up essentially like a big iron tool, right? It's like a crowbar. It's a crowbar, and and with this, she'd really be able to just I guess in the film they were like, hey, she's hurt him, but nothing that isn't going to heal. But with this crowbar, she could kill him, right? And so she has this thing over his head, and she really, thinks about bringing it down, breaking his arms, and then just maybe breaking his head open, right? And she thinks, and you can see, and boy, Jennifer Lawrence does a fantastic job, just doing a great job of acting this through. And she puts the crowbar down and she goes away. So at this point, she's very angry with him, and this is the crux of the film. This is the crux of the film, because here we get to it, right? The question that this movie is like a fortune cookie, right? It's got a riddle and a question inside, and it is a great question. The question is, if you do something horrible, if you do something 100% wrong, and if you do something horrible, and if you steal something of tremendous value from somebody, and if you do something with their life that you had no right to do, can the person that you wronged forgive you, right? And that is the entire question of this movie, and it's a brilliant question. It is absolutely a brilliant question, right? So what happens at this point is the ship begins to break apart, right? And there's some really cool scenes, like Jennifer Lawrence, Aurora, the writer, actually swimming in a pool that is caught in anti-gravity. So she's she's caught in like a 20-foot sphere of water, right? And then we also see these automated robots around the ship starting to break down. It's done really well. Like there's a lot of foreshadowing, and it's really fascinating. It was really, really fascinating part of the film. I liked it a lot, and it was just such a great film. But then what happens is one of the deck engineers also wakes up from his pod. His name is Gus Mancuso, right? So Gus, the deck engineer, gets up. Now he's actually crew of the ship, right? So, and this is played by Lawrence Fishburne, and he immediately begins setting to fixing the ship, right? He also starts working with Jim and Aurora to get them to understand the ship and be able to fix it as quickly as possible. Because fixing the ship is not that hard if you know what to do. Because the redundant parts really just need to be, kind of snapped in place, and then they'll do their automated thing, and things will be okay. But essentially, the way you fix the ship is you just replace the broken parts, and there are replacement parts for every single part on the ship, which I thought that makes a lot of sense. That's how you should build a colony ship, right? So it's really, really interesting from that. Now, Gus actually dies after 2 or 3 days, and at the same time he dies, the ship really starts to break apart, like really goes into serious break apart mode, right? Which, again, absolutely fascinating. And Jim and Aurora are now stuck fixing the ship together. So Jim absolutely does the lion's share. He's a mechanic, right? So he really understands what's going on. So he's hustling, doing everything he can to get this thing moving. And he does a good job with it. He's actually able to get everything where it should be. And they actually find the problem. And the problem is that a rock essentially went through one of the reactors in the ship, right? And now it's venting all this flame, and it's really the ship is really in significant problems, right? So with that said, we really get to see what's necessary to fix the ship, right? So at that point, in order to fix the ship, what they do is they actually find out what the problem is. They get there and they realize that there's this big chamber that is actually venting, that is building up all these flames. The flames are whirling around this reactor, and the whole thing needs to be vented, right? And once you vent it, it'll get rid of all the combustible materials, and the ship can be restored back to normal. But in order to do this, they start going through the steps, and they run into problem after problem after problem. They overcome each problem. They overcome each problem. They overcome each problem with ingenuity and with cleverness and just sheer brute force and effort, right? Each of those are used to solve different problems. But they get to the point where they have to open this one door. They have to pull this other physical lever, and what comes out is that somebody has to die to fix the ship. So Jim immediately says, "Hey, I'm going to do it." He armors up and goes into position, and he gets into a spacesuit, and he uses a door like a shield, and he allows the venting to happen even on him, right? So he's using the suit and he is actually vented into space, right? Then at that point, there's a scene where Aurora, the writer, needs to save him, and so she goes for a spacewalk. She catches him. And actually brings him back in and tries to resuscitate him, right? But she can't, right? Because he's just too damaged, right? And he's actually, he's like flatlined, right? And he's dying as they speak. Now the ship has this thing called an auto dock, and if you have high enough privileges, you can actually use it to do all these incredibly expensive things that will resuscitate the person, right? So at that point, they actually use she uses the auto dock, and she uses Gus, the deck engineer's wrist credentials, and says, "Hey, use everything on him," right? You know what I mean? So the auto dock fires off, and it actually revives Jim, right? So Jim's really excited, and he's back, and Aurora, the writer, she never says, "I forgive you," but she's in love with him. Like, she kisses him, and she's really happy he's alive. And honestly, just even risking her life to save him is somewhat saying she forgives him, right? So at this point, they come out, right? And the two of them are together. The ship is okay. But then also, over the next week or two, just figuring out what happened, Jim figures out that she saved him using the auto dock, and he realizes, hey, the auto dock can actually be used like a sleeping chamber. So while we couldn't reset any of the sleeping pods, we can use the auto dock as a sleeping chamber. So he tells Aurora, "Listen, you've been awake for a year, okay, or maybe 6 months, whatever. But that's okay." And and at that point, she has to decide what they're doing, right? And sorry, train coming here. Guy in front of me didn't handle that well. So anyway, so there's this auto dock situation. And sorry about the noise here. Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. So at that point, the auto dock can be used as a sleeping chamber. And so Jim says, "Hey, I'm really sorry I woke you up, but listen, you can go back to sleep now, right?" And she, she thinks about it and she goes, "No, you know what? I'm going to stay. You'd be alone then, and I'm going to stay with you." And that is full forgiveness. Again, like I think Aurora is one of these people that just cannot forgive someone, right? And can't say I forgive you, but she said it with her actions. And so she does. She stays awake with him. Now, he had planted a tree in the ship, right? And so the very end of the ship is us seeing all the other passengers waking up 90 years later, right? Like 89 years later, and seeing this huge tree that has grown and seeing this lush, verdant, like forest that these two had created inside the ship for themselves, right? But we don't see them, which I thought was really interesting. Now, what that opens up is a possibility of a sequel. Us seeing their Robin Crusoe life, seeing their children, that kind of thing. Really, really interesting, right? But, I really like the answer to this, that we as human beings can choose to forgive someone who has completely wronged us. Now, the reason why that would be an attractive story to me is because I'm an evangelical Christian, and I believe, all of us have sinned against God, and He does, and we're enemies to God, every single one of us. And Jesus Christ came down, died on the cross, and paid for all of our sins, and then offers that salvation to every single person on earth. And so, because Jesus forgives each and every one of us and actually sacrificed His life for us, I think that tells us, hey, that is something we can live up to. That is something that we can shoot for in our lives. And this movie does a great job of showing that forgiveness can be extended when it is not deserved. And that is grace, right? So grace is when you extend, you give something to someone that they don't deserve, right? But not only did Aurora, the writer, extend grace to Jim, she also extended mercy in that scene where she didn't kill him with that crowbar. Basically, what's really interesting is mercy is when you extend to someone something they don't deserve, right? So I'm sorry. It's when you spare them from what they do deserve. So he really did. I mean, if she had killed him, I think that would have been fair. Like he stole her life. That would have been justice, right? And I do think that there was that's challenging, right? It would have been understandable. I don't think it would have been justice. I don't think it's too far to say it would have been justice, right? It definitely would be too far to say it would have been justice if she had killed him. But I definitely think it would have been understandable. And he deserved a huge punishment. He deserved, at minimum, to be in prison for the rest of his life, or maybe even to be killed, right, by the correct authorities, right? And so she did extend mercy to him by sparing him from what he did deserve, which was punishment. So not only did she extend grace to him by giving him something he didn't deserve, which was forgiveness, but she extended mercy by sparing him from something that he did deserve, which was to be alone, to be punished for what he had done, all those things. And so that is, when you're talking about forgiveness, when you're talking about grace and you're talking about mercy, these are great, big, huge human questions. And this movie put that question forward in a way that was entertaining and exciting and well crafted. This movie, the script for this film spent a long time on the blacklist, right? Which is a famous list that has amazing scripts that haven't been produced yet, right? And so everybody knew this was a great story, and it was objectively a fantastic story, right? Now let's talk about the numbers of this movie. This movie cost $110 million to make. Jennifer Lawrence was paid $20 million for her role and 30% of the profit. Chris Pratt was paid $12 million. 1/3 of the budget for this film almost, right, was spent on the actors alone, right? That's a huge amount. That's just a huge amount of money, right? And so I was really fascinated by that. And, it really was something. So now I think they were paid exactly what they should have been paid. And the reason why is this movie stands 100% on their work, right? It stands about 80 or 90% on their work. If the actors in this film fail, this movie fails, period. So, now I do want to say there was an incredible amount of amazing special effects in this film. And credit should go to the people who did that because they worked very hard on it. And I think that their work should be recognized. But if you had incredible effects in this movie and the actors did not do their job, this would have failed. It would not have mattered. You can make the ship look as cool as you want. You can have all the greatest effects you want. But if this isn't acted well, if you don't have the right actors and actresses in these roles, this movie will not succeed, right? And and I think and actually I do think you could have done this movie way cheaper than it was done, right? But I really appreciate it. But because it was on the blacklist, they said, hey, let's not cheap out on this. Let's do a great job with this film. And I think this is an American classic. I really think this is just a gem of American cinema. And it was worth every single penny that they paid. And so I was really glad to see a movie with good writing and good acting. And I hope people see the value in this movie. But we're going to see if that's the case. Take care, everybody.